I was reading some article where I think Meta lost about $400 billion.
Last year, there was a massive attack for all Jaguar, Land Rover, and Range Rover companies worldwide.
Why do you want to take all of the pressure to become a CEO, manage a new company?
And I think it was $1.2 billion that they had to pay. I think a few years ago, there was a major breach.
As a CEO, what does it take for you, the mental pressure?
Their entire systems were down.
So that's a big, massive jump from 0 to 94 million value right now.
They couldn't sell you a $17 paint.
They are on a student visa or H-1B visa. This is definitely very inspiring. Welcome back to Still Learning with Abdullah Khadir. Today we have someone who has led companies. He is a CEO at Lockthreat, former COO at Cirrus Labs. He came to US as an international student and then navigating his visa journey. They dominate the UAE sector and at the same time they're growing big time in US. Today we welcome Naeem Hussain. Thank you so much, Naeem bhai, for coming on this show.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. Appreciate having me here.
How are you doing?
Doing good.
Matter of fact, we both are fasting right now. It's the month of Ramadan, and to not drink water while doing this show, it's going to be something very unique for us. So let's just get started with your early days. Right now, you are a CEO, but how did your mindset develop?
It's a very step-by-step, take everything that comes in your life with an open arm and a very, I would say, growth mindset. So every opportunity that has come my way, big or small, it's always saying yes and moving forward with it, right? So that's been a very interesting part of my journey, all the way from being a student on international visa, as you said, studying at George Washington University while doing my master's degree. I was also a research assistant and a teaching assistant in the school. So that was a very interesting learning, teaching journey. And then starting my career while I was at GW with Bell Atlantic, which later became Verizon. So that was my first forte into the tech world. But the learning never stopped. I think I did 25 some courses in the first year that I was with Verizon, in everything ranging from project management to technology. I remember back then Solaris system administration to Verity search engine administration, learning how to write code, learning about networking, everything while doing my master's degree till I graduated. So it was always a learning journey. But that's where it all started. Good solid education. And I've been very fortunate with some amazing mentors all throughout my career. And that has always been a big blessing. It's always good to have guidance from people who've been there, done that. Because I think wisdom is not simply about experience. It's about learning from wise people and using it.
Absolutely. I think I can relate a lot with that. I think, I came to US as an international student as well, but I think surrounding does play a big matter in terms of how you mentioned how you got your mentorship, right? Do you think a title behind a university plays a big role in shaping that mindset?
I think learning matters, and generally in the academic environment, it's what you make out of it. Do you spend time challenging yourself, or do you just do things to take the grades and the credit hours? I think that really matters. I remember back when I was working on my master's degree, I ended up doing 4 PhD courses, and one of them was in the economics of engineering, which back then, trying to get a master's degree in a technical line would seem a little odd, but I'm glad that I did it because it gives you an angle of how the business world looks at using technology. But more importantly, the person I was paired up with for a lot of the projects was a PhD student from Brazil and he was, I think, from the finance ministry of Brazil. So I was 21 or 22. So learning from someone who was already in the industry for many years while doing the course, economics and engineering course, those sort of relationships really help because you learn a lot from others' experiences, like I mentioned earlier, right? It's not just about reading a book and passing an exam. It's about, can you learn something from others? And so I kind of cherished those very interesting courses in neural networks. Today we talk about artificial intelligence. I did neural networks way back when. And again, these were all not the general courses. It was a little out there, but it was worth it. So when I look back, I think make use of your time at the university instead of just trying to get a GPA and a job. That would be my advice.
So back in the days, how easy was it for you to transition from being a student to getting your job?
Well, I went through campus recruiting. So I was fortunate enough to land my first job with my first interview. So I interviewed only with Verizon, actually, and they gave me an offer right away. I had a few other offers, but for that I had to travel to either Dallas or Boston. I had still completed my master's degree, so I did not want to leave Washington, D.C. So I think with Dell and EDS. So I preferred to just stay back and continue on in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, was a fantastic opportunity because a lot of tech, specifically in the federal space. I never worked in the federal space, but it's a good tech market back then.
Awesome.
I actually did my entire lower kindergarten all the way to high school in Abu Dhabi. I had a break in the middle, studied for 2 years in India, in Pune and Bombay. But for the most part, it was in the UAE. And then I went back to India to do my undergrad, and then came here, of course, to the US to do my grad studies right after that.
So what made you transition to US? Like what made you move here for studies?
I think back then your career choices were limited. It was either you get into engineering or you get into medicine. Those were the two primary pushes from family, friends, and everyone you spoke with. So I ended up getting into engineering. I started actually with instrumentation, but very quickly moved into electronics and communication. I actually picked up a lot of interest in telecommunication engineering. Really enjoyed those courses in my university. And then as I started researching further learning opportunities, telecom became the thing that I wanted to focus on. And I really enjoyed many of my undergrad courses in that space. So I started narrowing down universities which are known for telecommunication programs. And so there was University of Colorado Boulder, Pace University, George Washington, and I ended up getting admission at GW and decided to pursue my master's in telecommunication and computer science. And I started my career in telecom. So I worked for many years in Verizon and then Siemens Telecom. So that's where I began my, academic to, again, from engineering to getting a degree in telecom, excelling in that, and then actually working in that space. My claim to fame is to work in a company called Optisphere Networks, which was the Siemens company. And so the very first time they actually moved data on fiber optic lines.
So which year was this?
This was in 2000. So the first time the Olympics happened in Sydney, I think, Sydney Olympics, and they were moving data that was actually going through some of the Siemens Optisphere networks. And my role was to simulate and test the data packets moving from one city to the next as it transitioned to different parts of the world. And I remember back then it was, there was no virtual machines, right? You actually had to set up physical computers with endpoints and actually simulate how the switching mechanism would work and so forth. So, yeah, so I was kind of involved in that. There were, I think, 50 people working on that sort of work back then. So, pretty interested in that space, and it worked out pretty well till the telecom bust, of course.
So that the telecom bust was 2002 or?
Yeah, around 2002, yeah.
And then you were still able to continue your work, or
I then had the opportunity to either move to with Siemens ICN to either Boca Raton, or I could go to Germany. And then I had this other opportunity to get into healthcare. So I made a career move to go from telecommunications to the healthcare segment. So I started working at Siemens Medical Services back then, which is now called Siemens Healthineers in Philadelphia. And that's how I transitioned from telecommunication to healthcare, and ended up running a pretty large R&D team over there. You know, I got a lot of experience leading teams. I think I was 25, and you know, I was very fortunate. Again, great leadership with some amazing mentorship. So I was able to make my transition from the technical world into management. Siemens was the company that gave me that opportunity. Amazing leaders who worked and mentored me and helped me grow in that space. So I ended up running a very large 200 plus people, R&D team that spanned across Europe, in Sweden, in Germany, multiple locations.
Don't mind me asking, how old were you when you were running this team?
Probably 25, 26, something like that.
So did this come naturally to you? Because I know I'm 25 right now, and then the office where I work at, we have probably people around 30, 35, and we never got into a position where we are not capable, or we didn't get that chance to kind of become leaders of our team, right? So at the age of 25, what does company look into Naeem Hussain and they say, oh, he has this characteristics that he can become a leader?
I don't think that it happens magically, right? I don't think there's any, let me just say it this way, it doesn't happen suddenly, right? So a lot of things that we do through our entire life, I feel like these are building blocks, right? So when I was in high school, I used to be the captain of the house. I used to play a lot of sport. So leading cricket teams, leading soccer teams, leading swimming teams, and it doesn't happen overnight, right? And then I remember prior to that being a cultural secretary at the school, sports secretary. So you sort of, I think using the academic period, and in hindsight, it looks amazing, right? But at that point, we don't realize that. But these opportunities that come by to, lead anything, whether it's organizing something over a weekend for scheduling for 30 people to get in and get out. I mean, it takes a little bit of, time to manage that, and scheduling, managing, a little bit of project management. I think the biggest thing is people management and how you deal with people. Those things actually come in very handy. So these are, I think, incremental blocks in your life and your experience that whenever you get an opportunity, do you take it, right? And if you do take it, which is what I advise people to do, like you take it. Whether it's a massive success or a massive failure, in either cases, there's amazing things to learn. And so if you have a learning mindset, I think these things add on and build on each other step by step. So by the time you get to in your 20s, how much are you willing to drive, right? How much are you willing to push yourself? And I don't think there is any substitute to work hard, right? There's no substitute for working hard. And if you're cutting corners, that is very easy to spot from a management perspective. Now looking at where I've got into my career, that's not a very hard thing to pick out, right? Whether people are really, and I'm not saying just from a working hard perspective. I think it's another thing, which is, do you actually end up believing in the mission of the organization that you're working at that point of time? So when I was working at Verizon or when I was working at Siemens, it was really getting in line with the mission of the organization. We were in the healthcare space. So could you see yourself with whatever work you're doing, it's lining up to that business outcome? In our case, it was about human lives, right? So it does matter. So everything that you do, whether you're building software for clinical systems, financial systems, whether it's testing, whether it is getting software out the door to customers, back then on CDs, burning CDs and shipping them, you do that with a lot of commitment. And I think that gets recognized ultimately. The other piece also is, are you reaching out and talking to people to learn from them? So mentorship is very important and networking is very important. And I was very fortunate. I had great mentors, right? Learning from others. And never hesitating in asking for help, right? Let's not assume we know everything. So then what would we do if we needed to know something to deal with the situation and so forth? So I think there's an accelerated part to learning, but you have to build a trustworthy network with you, right? And be nice.
I want to emphasize on the term you used, right? Mission of the organization. Did you ever work just for purely for earning money, or it was every time the organization you went to, it was for the mission of the organization?
No, compensation is always an important part. To be paid fairly, I think, is an important aspect, right? You don't want to feel undercompensated or not valued, because that's one dimension. But I have never looked at in my career as the compensation being the be all end all. I've actually taken roles for no title and not a lot of cash back then, just purely for the experience, right? So you do have to think about, hey, what I'm going to do 3 years from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So having a little bit of foresight into what does that look like 3 to 5 years from now, when you're switching industries or picking new industries, if you are very short-term focused, it'll help you solve a problem for today. You can make $10,000 more today, but will that translate into whatever your financial goals are 5 years from now? Those are things that you have to pay attention to. But in my career, I have not put salary as my number one important thing. Of course, I want to have a comfortable life for myself, for my family, but that's not been the core goal. I've kind of allowed it to almost be like, let me do the best that I can, and I always believe that the financial part will take care of itself. But that doesn't mean you have to be stupid about it.
So look, for anyone who's 20 and above watching this podcast, what advice would you give them?
Focus on creating value. Don't worry about, don't get stuck up on things like compensation. Not everything is monetary, right? So as an example, I remember way back when I had friends who took up roles that paid 2x more than what I would make. And they would take up a job in programming or whatever other field that they wanted to do. They did really well, right? They did amazingly well at that point, and later too. But I think if you take a different career choice and track, and really there is in the tech world, are you going to be on the consulting side of the house? Are you going to be on the product side of the house? Whichever track you choose, there's nothing right or wrong with either one of them. It's just whatever your personal goals are. What are you going to experience, the intangible things that create value over the next 3 to 5 years, right? So you can make 3x more as an independent consultant, let's say, or you could make slightly less, but you could have the experience of running large teams, right? And both are great depending on where you are in your life. But if your goal is ultimately to run organizations, run teams, then which one would you pick, right? Would you pick to make a short-term financial gain, or would you pick something in which you have real-world experience, right, in managing people? Because that's a learning curve which is very steep, and you can't read books for that. You actually have to do it, right? So I think that's the value prop that one has to evaluate, and I evaluated it certainly for my roles.
I mean, going back to the point where you mentioned you were 25 and you were leading a team of 200 plus people.
It didn't start at 200. It ended up more than 200. But it started with a small team, probably like 20 people. Yeah, it started with a very small team of 20, 25 people. But I think in the next year and a half or two, it turned out to be a pretty massive team.
You created that value where the leadership were quite confident in you that they can assign you
I think
larger team.
I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to creating and saying, here's what my 12-month or 18-month roadmap looks like for delivery, and making it simple for anyone to understand this is what you're shooting for. Getting consensus and agreement from your leadership on the top, from your teams underneath, right? So you think of a triangle, you're kind of in the middle of those two tips. You have to manage upward and you have to manage downward. And when I say manage, you're really trying to create alignment, right? And so if you're able to get into that space of facilitating conversations within your team, getting to clear roadmaps, understanding the vision, mission, and objectives, the business objectives, and getting alignment across the board, then the next thing is execution, and you have to execute, right? There's nothing better than actually executing to get to success. So words are not valuable enough if you can't execute, right? No pipe dreams. Show me the software, right? That's important.
Recently, I was talking to one of a psychiatrist doctor here in Atlanta, Georgia. He mentioned that quite interestingly, and this was kind of funny to him, that most of his patients are people working in IT. So, so how did you cope up with the IT pressure?
I think the hardest part in the many different jobs that I have done in my career, and I've changed a lot of roles, I would say. I've never stuck in a role more than 18 months. That was my golden rule. Okay. I would like to get in, be there for about 18 months and get into something different, adjacent mostly, but different. I think the hardest one was to actually keep transactional systems and operational systems alive at every point. That can get stressful, right? Because everything's great till all systems are up. Nobody cares where you are. If you're a systems admin, then you know that specifically. It's when systems go down is when all hell breaks loose, right? So, but like with everything else, you create teams and plans and processes, and you become relentless about perfecting those processes, right? So the better you get at that, the less stressful it becomes. The other part was back then there was this whole thing of 24/7. So everything was 24/7. Build. This is pre-agile, so it was like, hey, build software 24/7 and handoffs in a very waterfallish way. I think that was hard, right? So to discover newer ways, better ways to handle that was in itself a challenge, right? People, process sort of challenge, and then later technology came into the play. But from a stress perspective, I love what I did every single job. There was never a job I never enjoyed doing what I was doing, so it did not seem like it was stressful. It was just another bump in the way to go solve.
So you did mention about the 18-month roadmap. So when you enjoyed working at a certain place, did you still stick to the 18-month rule? And
yeah, I always did. I always have, right? And sometimes it gets into a little longer, maybe 24 months, 32 months, something like that, just depending on what that role requires. But I always like to see succession plans put in place, right? So that's important. Everyone wants growth, right? So nobody in the world wants to say, I want to do what I want to do and not grow with it, right? Whether it is monetarily, leadership roles, or just personal growth, right? So from being a manager's perspective, it was important to understand, and everyone's need is different. So it's a very 1:1 sort of a conversation. But to be very clear with putting together structures where there's someone else who can step into your role, right? That becomes a very important part as a leader to create that succession plan. And you can only grow if you have a succession plan. And I think that is, from my perspective, one of my biggest learnings. So every time I had to go do the next thing, I needed the people in my team to be able to do what I do. And so unless you create that, you are not going to be able to go do the next thing. Mm-hmm. Then you're stuck, right? So that was an interesting sort of a take, at least from my perspective, even from my early days. I always kept that in mind.
So coming to the present day, over the last 25 years, I can say that most of the companies that you've worked at, you have been at a leadership role or at a manager role. Mm-hmm. Did you ever think that maybe 25 years later that you will be a CEO?
I have never got myself caught up in titles, right? I believe that titles are very important externally because organizations recognize whom you need to speak to an organization because of a structure. So it's important from that perspective. I'm speaking to the head of finance, or I'm speaking to the ultimate decision maker in the company, who thereby is the CEO, or am I speaking to someone in legal, whatever those roles might be. That's important from the outside world perspective. I don't believe internally an organization, hierarchies should be, in my opinion, flat, right? So when we are on a team, on a table, and we have the toughest of discussions and debates, I think it's a failure on a leadership perspective if people start looking at you and thinking about your title. I don't believe that that yields the best outcomes and the best ideas of the table that you can debate. It does take a little, it's not easy to do, because I think just human nature is you're looking at, and you can't kind of make a decision to decide between, am I talking to the human, am I going to talk to this title, if you understand what I mean, right? So so internally, from my perspective, structures are necessary to keep things in order so that we can move forward, right? So titles have never been important. I think the role is important, right? In terms of what are you doing, the autonomous nature of running your department, for example, what autonomy do you get to do that? I think is very important, right? Are you able to get the autonomy to make your decision, whether you're the CEO of a company or you're running your support group, or you're running an engineering team or you're running a Scrum team? It doesn't matter, right? Do you have the autonomy to do what you need to do? That's one part, right? The other part is, when you have the ability and the autonomy, it always comes with accountability. What I've seen many times is people want autonomy, they don't want accountability, right? So I think if you want to grow in your careers, then accountability becomes very important, right? You can't say, I want the ability to make decisions, but I'm not accountable for those decisions. If you own the outcome, right, then what does it matter what the title is, right? If you have the autonomy to do what you need to do, then what does it matter what your title is? That's my perspective. Okay, from my own personal journey perspective, after I got my MBA, I was not shooting to become a CEO or any of those sort of things, right? I just let it naturally progress. I focus more on, like I always say, creation of value. So when I started my own business, it was about creating value for my customers, value for my employees, right? Value for myself. I just kept going on that journey. When we started Lockthreat, it became clear that someone's got to lead that organization, right? And so from a board perspective, we decided, hey, who wants to do this? So the options were available to everybody, and then somehow I got into that role.
You just mentioned about Lockthreat. We can talk about that. So for the people who are watching and they don't know what Lockthreat is, can you explain them?
So every company, every organization in the world has to follow certain rules and regulations, and these regulations come either from your government, or they come from being able to do business by aligning to international standards. So that's one part of the equation, right? So that's the governance part of things. You need to be governed. So every company, for any company that you've worked, they have HR policies, right? So those policies are from a governance perspective. Then every organization faces risk, right? So you probably get a lot of emails to, train you internally for phishing, right? Hey, try opening this email, right? And then you get notified in training. So the reason they do the training is because that's a control to manage a risk, which is phishing, right? So when someone's phishing for information, you click on it, you actually create a risk for the company. A malware may be downloaded at the simplest way, or they might send you a file that might be a virus for the rest of the system, and so on, right? So the risk is, if this event happens, it can be catastrophic, and there could be different ways of how that catastrophe can be measured. A control is to do, hey, we're going to do training every 90 days, or we're going to test something every 6 months, whatever that is. I'm going to make you change your password every 90 days. Those are controls that are put into place. For a policy, which is, we're going to make sure that every employee in our company is using secure ways of accessing email. MFA is one way to do that. So MFA is one control. So every organization has to do that, right? Whether it is for your internal security mandated by the government or for doing business. So that is the notion of governance, risk, and compliance, G, R, and C. Policies, controls, risks is the way I want to think about that. So Lockthreat is a very innovative platform. We just got rated by Gartner as a disruptor in the enterprise category last year. And we are taking a very different approach of how you solve this problem. Fundamentally, what our approach is to say, how can we build a platform for governance, risk, and compliance that really allows the teams, whether they're risk analysts, compliance analysts, or people who support governance, do their work with minimal software development requirement. So a no-code platform. A no-code platform that allows for workflows and a hell of automation capabilities without the necessity to have a computer science degree, that you need to know how to code. So I think that was one fundamental thing that we changed in our approach. Then kind of studied the market a bit, and we realized that it's a global problem. So then every country has its own regulations. So if you go to Europe, you have the EU AI Act for artificial intelligence. In the US, mostly people use either the ISO or the NIST version. If you go to Singapore, Singapore has Singapore AI. If you go to Saudi and UAE, they have their own AI regulations. So what happens when you have to do business where you're building software, let's say in Saudi Arabia, and you're procuring AI systems from Europe and from US for the different pieces that you might have to put together the solution? How would you do governance on those sort of solutions? So Lockthreat is built for multi-framework, multi-regulation, multi-jurisdiction GRC, right? And that's a very unique thing. So we have the ability, the way we have architected the solution, to be able to deploy anywhere. We can deploy it in a VPC. We can deploy it in a data center. We can host it as a SaaS. And that gives us the enablement. And in the governance, risk, and compliance world, it's pretty important. Something called data sovereignty and data residency. So the countries where you're doing this work, they want to make sure that the data never leaves their boundaries. Lockthreat is one of the tools that allows you to do that. And so that's the highlight of, I think what governance, risk, and compliance and what Lockthreat's all about.
Thank you so much. I think I had some questions on that part, and you pretty much covered a lot of my questions, what I wanted to hear. I wanted to understand this side of the world where you initially kind of started giving your product in Middle East. What was the thing, or what was the gap that Middle East, a platform like Lockthreat is required there because of the data centers and the AI that they're catching up rapidly?
So it's a markets, I think, are defined, or segments of market all over the world are defined based on your maturity. So US, I would say, is a mature market, right? And you think about from a compliance perspective, there's lots of regulations, processes, and so forth defined. If you look at Europe, they're highly regulated as well. But the rest of the world is evolving, right? So if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, they're trying to adopt the latest technologies, building on capabilities, whether it is in healthcare, in the financial sector, insurance sector, and so forth. So they're working through new regulations. Now, when you create these regulations, you have to actually assess, audit, and make sure that from a policy perspective from the government all the way to things that are happening on the ground are aligned, right? So there is a huge need for solutions that help ministries and regulatory bodies to be able to implement their policy and regulatory changes in an efficient manner. This is where Lockthreat comes into play. So, for example, for one of our customers, the Department of Health of Abu Dhabi in the UAE, it's a gold standard for healthcare regulatory services. We help them regulate about 3,700 entities for UAE's framework, which is ADIX, the Abu Dhabi Healthcare Information Act. And so the focus is to help 3,700 some entities get regulated by the regulatory body on all the parameters that they care about, whether you are a 500-bed hospital or you are a 2-people pharmacy shop, right? So that is the need. But then you can turn that around and say, well, it's the same thing in financial sector. It's the same thing in critical infrastructure. That's a big one, right? So whether it's desalination plants, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's refineries, everywhere compliance is required, whether it is to manage risk or for international trade or anything else.
So it's a global gap that you can fill.
I believe so, that every organization in the world, and we have customers here in the US, right? So city of Baltimore, as an example, is a customer, and Masdar city in the UAE is a customer. So the need is very similar whether you are in the US or you are in the Middle East, right? Because every entity has to provide services. You want to make sure that the quality of all the policies that you have in place and the controls that you have in place are at the level that you expect, at the threshold that you expect it to be, to basically say, yeah, we're good with entity A, entity B, and so on. And it's very similar in any organization also. Take any organization, including the companies that I've run, right? Cirrus Labs as an example. We've got, we operate in, at least during my time, we grew it to, I think, 5 or 6 countries. And so now you have to worry about tax laws in 7 different countries, human resources laws in 7 different countries, right? So it's not, even the holiday schedules are not the same, right? Because every region has its own thing. Mm-hmm. So how you create policies for employees, how do you manage employee transfers when they move from one location to the other? On the surface, it seems very simple, but it's actually got a lot to do with compliance, right? You can't go create rules based on what you feel like. That you have to adhere to the regulations that are provided by that specific country specifically, right? So compliance is required across the board. Same thing with IT security. So we'll see a lot of policies and processes that are in place. Sometimes it seems mundane. Why do I have to submit a timesheet every week? But think about it, right? The impact it has on the financial cycle, the cash flow cycle, what banks require, and especially in our federal business, the government requires us to do that. Right? So with every entity that you're working with, every location that you're working with, these policies and regulations are sort of guided with the need for the business. And so I feel like almost every business requires this. And so, from a GRC perspective, whether it's a point solution, today, if you're building software, it would be very hard for you to get into any enterprise to be able to sell software if you didn't have a SOC 2 Type 2, right? And in order to get that, you have to define the process. You need a platform. You can do this in Excel, by the way. It will not be scalable in the longer run, because we hope that everyone who gets into a business venture grows their business. So from a business perspective, or if you're a founder who's getting started, right, you have to start thinking about, hey, today I might require 1 framework. Tomorrow I might need 4. Am I going to create a system which is in point and gives me the benefit today? Or am I going to make an investment to make sure that as my company grows, right, and my needs grow, I have a system that can allow me to scale with it. So I think from a GRC perspective, that's our outlook.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. I was reading some article where I think Meta lost about $400 billion.
Yeah, there's
because of they didn't follow some policy or anything.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is risks that come to bear, right? I'll give you a couple of examples. Last year, I used to have a Jaguar F-Type, and I had a red color, Italian racing red color car, and I was about to sell it. But it had a minor scratch, very minor scratch in the front, and I wanted the paint. Okay, I needed the paint to be able to brush it. So I called Jaguar and said, here's the car, here's the VIN number. And they're like, yeah, sorry, sir, we cannot look into our inventory system. I'm like, okay, what happened? So I don't know if you realize that sometime last year, there was a massive attack for all Jaguar, Land Rover, and Range Rover companies worldwide. Their entire systems were down. They couldn't sell you a $17 paint. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do manufacturing, right? This was because of an IT breach. So that's on the manufacturing side of the house, right? Inventory management, supply chain management, everything gets impacted. You look at what happened with Meta, the example that you're giving. That was a non-compliance with the privacy and data laws. and I think it was $1.2 billion that they had to pay out. I think so, right? There are many such incidents. I think a few years ago there was a major breach right here in Atlanta with Equifax, right? There was a massive breach. All of these breaches and these failures are failures of controls in organization to manage risk. So when you do audits and you do assessments, you're testing these controls, you're testing these risks to make sure that you're not leaving any ends open. So for organizations, it might seem like a very operational routine. We need to do these 5 steps, but the impact of when things happen might not help a lot, right? Might not be very pretty. But more importantly, sometimes it's not just a financial loss. It's also a reputational damage, right?
Indeed, yeah.
Right. So the reputation, when you have a data security breach, all right, or there is a denial of service, right, or if you're not able to, if you're a hospital and you can't provide care, that is directly associated with your reputation.
And you lose customers.
You lose customers. You lose a lot of market because of that, right? So I think the boards all over the world are realizing is that this is not a checkbox. It should not be treated as a checkbox. It should be treated as a regular business cadence that you need to look at these things. And the way I think about GRC, and which I believe is where the world will go, especially with all the changes that are happening in AI, in agentic AI, in the cyber world, I believe that instead of having point-in-time assessments and point-in-time audits and this checklist mechanism, I don't think is the way to go in the long term. So at Lockthreat, we are taking a very different approach. We believe that the more real-time, near real-time we get this information in a mechanism, in a format that the right executives get this data and can make informed decisions, the better we are going to be, better organizations and our customers are going to be from a governance, risk, and compliance posture, right? So instead of having risk, which is very qualitative, can we actually convert that into quantitative models? So we are working, and I think in the next 3 months or so, we'll be releasing our version of Lockthreat, which will actually have the ability to do quantitative risk analysis, right? We have already created systems using AI to do policy generation, controls generation. We have the ability where today already with our existing software, where if you submit an evidence to manage a control, Lockthreat will already tell you whether that evidence will work for that control. So that might seem like, oh, that's a very small little thing, but think about it. Larger organizations have thousands of controls, hundreds of thousands of evidence files, and you're processing these in near real time and providing that insight. It changes the equation, it changes the game. And I think that's why I feel the disruption, the market is ready for that sort of disruption.
So let's say a customer is watching this podcast and they might be thinking that if you're utilizing AI for this specific compliances needs, what if it gets inaccurate sometimes?
So there's always there are 2 things to that, right? So number one, the way we have built our system and our mechanism of do this is we deploy Lockthreat Genius, which is our AI suite, only in the customer's environment, right? So it is inside your VPC or in your data center, and it only has your data.
Okay, that makes
right? So there's no training of the model or training of the data with third-party data. We just don't want to get into that, right? So we have a RAG model. We have fine-tuned the RAG model, and it only works off of your data inside your network, right? So I think that's not worth a risk for us to take, right? And I don't think any customer worth their salt will ever want compliance data outside of their network, right? So that's how we handle it.
No, absolutely. That absolutely makes sense. I think a lot of organizations are moving on the same page where they're trying to have their own RAG system created, where they're just trying to play with their internal data instead of using ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot and stuff. My question here was, this is the fun round for me, I would say. Why did you specifically choose Lockthreat? I mean, you're driving a nice Jaguar. Why do you want to take all of the pressure to become a CEO, manage a new company, get it up from scratch and stuff?
Well, that's an interesting question. So if I look back at my career, all the way from my days at Siemens, uh, when I look back now, at that point I never understood this quite, right? But back in the day, when I started working at Siemens, I used to run something called a build and release team. Today we call it DevSecOps, right? When I was working at the bank, we were releasing software 275 days in a year to 7 million live customers, right? I was the head of technology at ING Direct Bank, building that sort of capability. I'm talking 2007, by the way, right? This term called DevSecOps was not there at that point of time, right? So these terms sort of evolved as we go along, right? So I've been very fortunate, at Siemens working on 900 distinct environments to test. I don't know how many versions of software to deploy all over the world, and it's a very interesting thing. And I talk to my teams about this, right? Once you ship that CD to, let's say, Brazil, even by FedEx, it would take you 4 days to get the software there. So if the installation plan starts on a day and the CD arrives and it has the wrong install notes, the wrong release notes, think about the impact, right? So there is a lot of precision that has to occur. So when I look back at my career, I've had amazing opportunities, and I've taken those opportunities to solve some pretty interesting problems. So when I look at the governance, risk, and compliance space, I feel like, this is a massive opportunity, a huge technical challenge. There is a business need, right? And I think we can truly make an impact. So I'm sort of pumped up about it. And by the way, I really love building. I'm a builder by nature. So I love to run companies in this particular stage as we start putting all the equations together. So I'm enjoying it, having a blast.
Then as a CEO, how do you go about hiring and terminating? I know, like, even in my previous organizations that I've worked, I've seen employee at a higher level, for example, he or she could be at a C-suite level, and they, out of nowhere, we get to know that they're terminated.
Yeah.
So did you come across those situations in your life where you were at the position where you had to probably terminate someone at a bigger level?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, this is part of when you get into management and when you get into people management, this is unfortunately or fortunately one of the jobs that you have to do. I think from my viewpoint, you have to be clear with what the business outcome is, right? And as long as and I believe that as long as any person that you're interacting with, as long as they understand where they stand at, right? Which means whether you're performing really well or you're not performing very well. As long as that clarity is provided by the manager, right? In most cases, there are no surprises. If you're not performing really well, especially at the C-suite level or an executive level or any level for that matter, and you're getting consistent feedback from your manager about the gaps that are present, about the plans that need to be delivered, and if you are missing them consistently, I think when you're talking to seasoned employees, people who are in the executive suite, it's not a surprise usually, right? And it's very conversational, by the way. And I have always been amazed that as long as we keep it respectful, but keep it very respectful, very professional, and it's nothing personal, right? At the end of the day, it's like, here's a business objective we wanted to get at. You came in to solve that business problem. If nothing changed, then why are we not at that point? And sometimes it's not simply about an outcome or a result, right? Even how we get from point A to point B matters, right? Did you build out the capabilities in your team for us for the next thing, right? The next thing that we need to do. So I think that's why I feel like from any role, when you get into management, senior leadership, lower leadership, whatever it might be, getting that alignment between what that company's mission and vision is, what the objectives are, what you need to deliver, what your team needs to deliver, right? That's your role. And so if you're not able to deliver that for anybody, including myself, right? My board might come tomorrow and say, this is not what we expect you to deliver. A change might be a better thing to do. So I think you have to keep a very open mind. And I don't think these things are personal ever, right? So these are business decisions to be made to move the company to the next level. So I would always urge everyone, and I think keep the conversation very open, right? Know where you stand at. Sometimes everyone gets too busy to provide feedback, but it doesn't stop you to get 15 minutes on your manager's calendar to ask for feedback. Asking for feedback is one of the best things you can do for your career, right? Getting in front of someone and saying, "How do you think I'm doing? Is there a place I can improve on?" Right? What would you suggest? What would you recommend? What should I learn? Where should I go in terms of my step? You can probably get some of the best advice ever, right? So if that conversation's ongoing and you know where you stand at, it's never a surprise. Yeah. So that was an interesting period. The way I landed up at Siemens was also interesting, right? So I used to work in Verizon, and then I wanted to join a startup with a big crime craze about startups. So I joined a company called Linguatech back then, which built embedded billing systems that ran, I believe, on VxWorks operating system. Funny enough, I joined that company, started working on that technology, and one fine day, the one company went bankrupt, and I was on an H-1B visa back then. And like with everyone else's journey, you start looking for a job, attending career fairs, and I went and bumped into the CEO of Optisphere. And the questions he asked me was, "What are you working on?" I said, "Oh, I'm working on a Siemens SMX 2700 switch." And it's like, "Oh," because he's the one who was working on that switch also. Mm-hmm. And so we built an instant connection, and there was my next job, right? So I've been fortunate, at least in my career, that every time an event like this has occurred, that it's sort of been a setup for the next thing in my life. So, whenever the switches had to happen, I've not been stuck and said, "Oh, I'm only going to do telecom. I'm never going to move into any other space." If the industry is not doing well, hopefully we've built enough transferable skills that you can move to the next domain. So I've been fortunate to be able to do that from telecom to healthcare to financial industry to consulting, and almost every industry in consulting. So yeah, but I've never been terminated for performance in my life. Okay, that's never been the problem. But other things happen. It's beyond your control.
I mean, for someone who's watching this, and if they are on a student visa or an H-1B visa, this is definitely very inspiring. So I believe you're a US citizen right now.
Yeah.
So can you go back to the day where you kind of became a resident of US? How did that feeling, how was that like?
It was terrific. I was in New York back then. I had just finished my MBA. I had taken up a job at a company in New York in the education space. So I have actually run schools in the US. So I did that for a bit, and I was transitioning to start my first own business. So I was in New York at that point of time, and that's when I got my citizenship, and it was fantastic. I mean, the ability to then be able to go beyond and dream of the next big American dream, right? The next thing that you want to do with your life. Of course, it comes with a lot of responsibilities that you have to be able to do, right? But it does open up a bunch of opportunities, and it has done that for me. I think the key thing is that there is no restriction, right? So when you're in the H-1B visa or OPT space, there are certain constraints, right? Good, bad, or ugly, that is the process, right? So as long as you follow that process and grow, I would say the focus is, for me, that was an event. I loved it. I love being a US citizen. It really has helped us a lot. The opportunities here are massive in the US. I've really lived my dream. I've been able to do almost everything that I set out to do, that I would have wanted to kind of go after, career-wise, building firms and so on and on. We've been on Inc. 5000 4 times in a row, right now being recognized by Gartner for a product company. I don't think it's possible to do many of these things in a lot of other countries in the world. So US provides us an unbelievable opportunity. But it's a process to get to that spot, right? So got to get in line, do the right thing, do the work, right? And hopefully you'll see the end of light at some point in time. So for me, it was a great experience.
Beautiful. Can you tell me top 3 books that a youngster should read to have those characteristics that you have right now?
Top 3 books. Okay, there are some very interesting ones to read. I think Winning by Jack Welch is a good one to read. It's one of my first business books that I read. I think I love the line he says, in the 80s, even a dog could run GE. So when times are good, easy to run any business. It's when, for example, we went through COVID. Running a business during COVID is a very different deal. So that's a very interesting nugget. The Good to Great is a great book. And if you look at it's Good to Great, I would highly recommend. Now, many of the companies are not there anymore. They've actually moved away from their core principles, but they talk about the hedgehog principle. Fantastic. Like, it's all about sticking to your plan, right? Not changing plans every day. That's the story between the fox and the hedgehog in that particular book. So Good to Great, I would say, is a great read. The other one I would suggest is Nudge. So Nudge is an amazing book. It talks about how to change people's or how to get people to do things. And it uses some kind of economic theory behind it. So yeah, those 3 would be my top 3 books.
Awesome. Any piece of advice you would give your younger self? For example, you're 20. Anything you might want to change, or any advices?
Any advice to my younger self? Keeping more healthy. That would be the thing I would say. As I've done my own career, I've sort of put my health to the back burner on many, many different occasions. There have been many starts and stops. I still continue to do sport and stuff like that. But to my younger self, I would say, hey, make some more time. Make some more time for yourself. Make some more time to do self-care.
Awesome. Your favorite car?
My favorite car that I have driven that I like is the Jaguar F-Type car.
Okay, so that's the dream car?
I mean, that's the car I've driven. I love to go fast. That was a fast car, but comfortable, so I enjoyed it.
If you don't mind me asking this, how much is Jaguar, the red one that you drive for, like in terms of money worth?
It's shy over 110, 120K, something like that.
And that's a dream life for anyone who's watching this. Even for me, it's very inspiring. From the position you were at as an international student to the outcomes that we're seeing right now, it's very valuable. Following up, I want to put the rapid fire aside, and I had one question, right? So whenever you deal with clients as a CEO, what does it take for you, the mental pressure, for example, Abu Dhabi Healthcare, right? So they were one of your first clients. What was going through before you got that final agreement with them?
See, I'll tell you, sometimes we make business very complicated, and we get so hung up on titles and so forth. I'll tell you, my experience with business is very simple. My father was in business for 45 some years. He's run his own business for 45 some years. And there's one thing I've learned from him, all right? At the end of the day, it's the human relationship that matters, right? So your titles, your education, your smartness, and all those things are one thing, right? But at the end of the day, how you interact with another human is just fundamental of how you behave, what your character is, right? And do you have integrity at the end of the day? So I don't think we need to complicate. There's no need to complicate, right? Keep it very simple. You have your strengths and what you are bringing to the table, and have that human conversation, and be authentic. There's no need to put any show, right? Just be authentic, be yourself, and I think that goes in my case. That has worked out very well, right? I say things that I can do. If I can't do something, I'll tell you I can do it. You may not like the answer, but that's okay, right? But I wouldn't rather say things that are aspirational and not true, right? So I try to really manage that from what can be done and what can we do, right? If there is things that we can do for our customers, for our team members, that's reasonable, that falls within all the parameters that we care about, why not, right? But if we can't, we have to be straight up and say no, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's really human relationship. That's all that matters, right? All the other things are tools, knowledge, and toolkits that you can have to enhance and create value in that conversation. But at the end of the day, people buy from people. People work with people. People don't work with systems, People work with people. If you have a problem today, if there's a disruption of electricity at your house, you're going to pick up the phone and call someone. That someone may not be the CEO of the electrical company, right? Or the person who's providing power, water, whatever that might be. But that interaction that you have with them and the connection you make with them over that phone call can be the difference of whether your service is turned on that day or 3 days later. Right? Because there are always methods, there are always overrides. But if you're not able to build that connection with the person, the human on the other side, and you're not human enough to be connecting with humans, right? They will give you the system answers, right? Oh, the system says 3 days from now. But if you can create that sense of urgency by connecting with them and explaining to them why it is that you need something, at least they will try. They may not be able to do it because of their own restrictions, right? But do you want to, as a human, at least give it a shot? I would encourage people to try that.
That's very enlightening. What does the future of Lockthreat look like after? What are the goal plans for the next 5 years?
Whoa, 5 years is a long time. I think first thing first is I want us. We have created a vision and a mission. I'll just walk you through that, and I think the rest of the stuff should follow, right? So our vision is to be the GRC platform for any framework, any industry, in any region of the world. And technically, we have the ability to. Today, we already have 200 plus frameworks. We can deliver it for any industry with those frameworks because we have both regional capabilities and we have industry specific capabilities, and we can also deliver in any region of the world because of the way we have architected our deployment. But that's our vision. Our mission for Lockthreat is to make compliance, the whole compliance process, a delightful process for our customers, right? It's a burdensome process. How can we turn it into a delightful experience for our customers? And when I say delightful, it's just not great software with wonderful user interface, right? It's every transaction, every conversation. So when we're doing a POC, I was speaking with a customer, hopefully by the end of this week, next week, they should sign up. And they're talking to a lot of our competitors. But one of the things they said to me is, we've been through the POC process. It's fantastic to work with your team, right? That's what you require to really grow, right? So the values towards that mission, we have three values that we're talking about internally in the company. It's a growing company. We're learning. First one is we want everyone in the company, including myself, to be mission oriented. The mission is to create delightful experiences, right? The second was empathy. You have to be empathetic to your customers, to your own team members, to really understand their needs, not talk about solutions, understand their problems. First, seek to understand, then to be understood, right? So without understanding what their needs are and hearing them, right? So that's the empathy component. And the third one is discipline. In order for us to scale and grow, we have to be super disciplined, right? Resources are limited. You have to execute really well, learn from the good and the bad that actually occurs, right? So if we go down that path, right, we will have a very good growth trajectory this year, and we have a very solid roadmap to bring in some amazing features into the realm and I think truly disrupt the way GRC is being done today. There are some amazing use cases that we are working in when it comes to agentic AI governance, cyber GRC governance, critical infrastructure governance. And so if we have the ability to understand our customers' need and execute in a highly disciplined manner, I think we're going to start getting some amazing customers and starting to solve their needs. And the one thing I will also say is, right, I don't want to be I don't want to be having the hubris or be blindsided with the fact that we don't know everything, right? So there are lots of things that are actually happening in the industry. When you think of AI governance, agentic AI development, and what does it entail, the cyber risks that are created by agentic AI and these agents that we're creating. I don't think anybody has answers to this. So this is also creating a collaborative ecosystem to partner with customers, partner with OEMs to build these capabilities, right? So it's not a linear journey. right? You have to actually bring the ecosystem partners on this, including your customers, to get to this endpoint. And we are doing that successfully. So we are actually working on some amazing use cases in healthcare, in large tech, in cyber, solving these problems. So if we execute on this, I think there's the demand from these customers today. There's a spend that actually already happens in the GRC space, because our category on the business side for Lockthreat is not a new category of spend. Companies have to spend on GRC. They have to spend on audits. Every company has a security posture. They are spending on tools, right? So if you look at a donut, the spending is already happening. Question is, can we provide those capabilities at a price point that is an immense value for a must-have capability for every organization? So that's what the growth challenge for us is going to look like.
If anyone who's watching this and they're growing their enterprise at a big level, I'm going to drop Naeem Hussain's LinkedIn in my description, and as well Lockthreats, any description that your team can provide me that will be helpful for them to reach out to you directly.
Sure thing.
I'll drop that as well. And just for a comparison study, 2022, when was Lockthreat launched exactly? 23?
2 years ago, 23. December of 23, so literally 24.
December of 23, what was Lockthreat valued at versus February 26th, that now we are talking March 2026, what is it currently valued at?
So we raised a small round last December at about 46 million pre-money. Now we are valued at about 94 million pre-money. So we've almost doubled the value of our stock in less than 12 months.
And when you started, what was it valued at?
When you start something, it's valued at exactly zero.
So that's a big, massive jump from 0 to 94 million value right now.
Yeah.
And from the beginning, since the beginning, you were the CEO, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. The flow of my questions wasn't necessarily precisely in a structured way, but I really do hope that you might have learned something. And if you did, please do follow us, subscribe, share, and at the same time, for any youngster watching this, GRC space is growing at a higher level, at a rapid level, as you have heard Naeem Hussain talking about it. So there is a lot of opportunity for you to get a job as a GRC analyst, GRC. What are the other different roles?
So there are lots of great opportunities to learn and grow in the GRC. And for anyone who's a young engineer getting out and you're interested in this space, so there are roles that have to actually help you to define the policies and the controls. These are analyst roles. Then you have roles for risk. It's a very different system. So there's risk-related roles. Risk analysts is what they typically call it. Compliance managers, risk analysts. These are roles that are pretty common. Now with the advent of the newer technologies and the complexities with AI and for cyber, that just opens a whole new field of, I think, an intersection of what you do in cyber. Cyber, for example, right? You might have 30 to 40 tools within your company to manage cyber, something for MFA, something for database security, email security, and so on and on and on, right? Access control, all those sort of things, right? So you can be an expert in those domains, but from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, you're going across the board, right? So that's a great skill set to have. The other way to get into a career in the GRC space is to look at becoming a lead auditor, right? So we'll talk a little bit about different, what I would say, career paths in this space. So one, let's begin at the top, right? At the top of a company, you have certain roles like CISOs, right? So Chief Information Security Officer. Then you have another role called CRO, Chief Risk Officer, right? Then you might have another role, Chief Compliance Officer. So these are roles in GRC at the very top, okay? Now, any report that these people build up from a risk perspective, compliance perspective, or from an IT security perspective, the CISO does, have to be signed off by whom? By the CIOs, by the CEOs, and by the boards of the company. So these are very high-ranking roles. And then you have team structures under that. In order to become a CISO, you have to be in the cyberspace, right? If you're in risk, in the CRO role, you have to be a risk analyst, right? If you're in the compliance role, you have to understand how audits and compliances work. Now there are in Lockthreat itself, we have over 200 frameworks. Now you can specialize and say, I'm going to look at quality. So there's ISO 9001 and so forth. Today, in this day and age, you should be looking at getting certified, for example, to be an auditor and assessor in the AI space. Tell me which tech company is not doing something in AI, right? So now you're talking ISO 47001, you're talking NIST AI RMF. If you're working in Europe, you have to get to EU AI Act and so on and on and on, right? Data is huge. So there is a specialty for data privacy, data management, things like GDPR compliance and so forth, right? So lots of great opportunities to learn and really master the domain and the knowledge within what it takes to build these capabilities within an organization. If you're tech heavy, you can go into the IT role, so the CISO cyber role, right? If you are a great analyst and you understand how to do statistics really well, risk quantification is a great space to be in, right? How do you quantify risk? We need to understand that. Is it worth spending $100,000 to save $3 million of risk down the line? I think it's a good bargain, but someone's got to do that quantification. So risk is a huge deal, right? And if you want to do business anywhere else in the world, for example, you want to sell software in another part of the world, you need to understand the compliance landscape and the legal landscape around that. So it's a great learning opportunity in the entire space, and it's global. If you do ISO 27001 here in the US, it works no differently whether you go to India or you go to the UAE or you go to Singapore. It's the same thing. So it's a very transferable, growable skill.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naeem Hussain. It was a pleasure having you on Still Learning with Abdullah Khadri. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and please do follow Naeem. And if you have any questions, I'm also going to drop your email, and students and your clients, future clients, hopefully can reach out to you there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, appreciate it a lot.